A friend of mine lent me his laptop last summer, a laptop which was significantly more powerful than the one I currently had at the time. It was a great opportunity that I had to take advantage of to the fullest, which meant playing as many games as I possibly could that I normally couldn't because of my potato. I had countless games in my backlog that I promised myself I was going to get to, but I never ended up getting to any of them. I downloaded one game and played that one game through the entire summer. That game was Devil May Cry 5. I thought I might drop it after one playthrough like I did with DMC4, but I stuck with it and played it again, and again, and again, until eventually I gave my entire soul to this game. At the time of this recording, I completed 8 playthroughs, 4 Bloody Palace runs, and experienced many deaths, until finally I reached enlightenment, having obtained every last Steam achievement available for me to collect. This was one of the most painful tasks I've ever committed to in my life, but it was all worth it. After spending so much time with it and going through just about everything it has to offer, I wish I could say every minute I spent with this game was amazing, but even it was able to push me past my breaking point on occasion. I'd hoped to get this video done sometime around last summer when I had been playing it more consistently, but because of my schoolwork, desire to play other games, and procrastination overcoming me more often than not, I'm only just getting to it now. I'm only a bit late, right? But now, it's finally done, and I could not be happier. So, allow me to indulge you in the good, the bad, and the profoundly sad, because I spent my whole summer with Devil May Cry 5. This game is an absolute spectacle. Every frame of animation and every nanosecond of audio oozes personality. One of the main reasons I was initially so hooked on Metal Gear Rising was how well it utilizes some of the greatest set pieces in video game history to keep you glued to the screen. While not to the same degree, I would say Devil May Cry has had a decent track record of just off-the-wall insanity. That tower scene from DMC3?
It was perfect. Perfect.
The cutscene right before Dante fights Agnes in DMC4?
And your judgments interest me not. For I am here to reclaim what is rightfully mine.
I mean, you can't make something like this up. Like, how am I supposed to explain a scene like this to my friends? And DMC5 has plenty of these. I'm sure we're all well aware of Dante's dancing scene by now, even if you haven't played the game. The best part about the scene is that it doesn't even make sense in the context of the game. When he gets a new weapon, Dante will typically have a short cutscene showcasing its abilities for the player, but the dance showcases nothing. He just does it, and it's amazing. I think every game from now on should have a random dance scene like this. Many of the boss fights here are mountains compared to the character you're playing as, making most of them an interesting set piece of their own. The last boss fight starts on top of a church, then continues inside the church itself when the ceiling breaks, and then ends outside when the whole thing breaks. Not all boss fights are as cinematic as this one, but most of them have some kind of spectacle to them. A big part of that spectacle comes from Nero's Devil Bringer, returning as the new and improved robot arm, the Devil Breaker, which you unlock fairly early into the game, or just growing back the original after you beat the main campaign. Nero's Devil Bringer gives him access to a unique grab attack against almost every enemy and boss in the game, aside from a few Bloody Palace bosses where he just does the default punch and kick barrage. But for most things in the main campaign, there's a unique animation. And you know, they didn't need to do that, but they did. And that's pretty cool. It's very apparent that Nero hates the Artemis fight as much as I do, because he just wails on her like it's nobody's business. He throws Goliath like Bowser. If you time it right, he even suplexes Vergil. With the Buster Arm equipped, the damage he can dish out in just one hit is absurd. It shouldn't be legal to do this much damage with one move in a Devil May Cry game. More on that later. Devil May Cry pulls off style better than any series I've ever seen, and it's at its absolute best here. From the big Devil Bringers to the smallest sword swipes, everything looks absolutely gorgeous. And it feels good too, but it doesn't just feel good, it sounds good. Who made the music for this game? You? It was you. I'm just gonna, oh, thank you. You are awesome, you are incredible, I love you. At the very least, everyone's heard Bury the Light, right? It just recently passed 100 million plays on Spotify. I would play some, but I value my videos being free of the yellow claim stain. What I appreciate the most about Bury the Light, and really all the battle themes included, is that it brings a dynamic element that has unfortunately not been too common in the gaming sphere as of late. When you start a combat section, the music kicks in, usually just an instrumental intro. but then you start getting stylish, and the music goes. Then, after you finally hit that S rank, it plays the chorus and you ascend into the next plane of existence. 3 great combat songs, and Dante's new combat song, all share this trait, and it just feels so powerful. Like, at the end of the day, I don't care about the score at the end of the level. The real reward for getting stylish points is the song popping off during the fight. If for some reason you don't like these great combat themes, there is a decent selection of music from past games that you can set to replace any specific character's current battle theme. The selection available is kind of all over the place, but there's plenty of tracks here to soothe over whatever you need. Vergil 2 from DMC3, classic. I love Dante's DMC4 combat theme, so I'm glad I can listen to that in a game without having to play DMC4. Vergil's inclusion also added a few tracks, one of which was his unused battle theme from DMC4, which I still don't understand why it was unused when they could have just thrown it over the default battle theme, but instead you have to hear Nero and Dante's themes the whole game. It's such a relief to actually hear this in-game. Like, you could theoretically just mute the music in-game, boot up Spotify, and listen to it that way, but hearing it in the game, it hits different. It's pure bliss. The cherry on top is the inclusion of Devils Never Cry and the remixed HRHM version that released on Steam a while back. These are some of the best tracks ever made in the history of ever, but these songs are so long compared to the others, and they lack the dynamic ability of the original tracks. So aside from some Bloody Palace levels, most combat rooms are going to be over before the song can even reach the best part. I guess it's asking a bit much for them to have made every song dynamic, but I'm happy with the inclusion to change the combat theme regardless. There are some themes in here that I don't think they thought about beforehand and just threw them in. Burial's theme from DMC4 is here despite it not being very good. Beowulf's theme was included with Vergil's sound selection, which makes sense because he has Beowulf as a weapon. And it's a fine theme, but it's also just a slower remix version of Cerberus's theme, which I would have much preferred over this. DMC2 music is here. I don't know if it's good or not. I never listened to it, and I probably never will. Overall, I personally would have changed the sound selection a bit, but I'm glad this feature was included regardless. In regards to the rest of the original soundtrack, it's also filled with absolute bangers. A few remixes of Devil Trigger present throughout, my favorite one being used in the main menu. Capcom could totally compete with lo-fi hip-hop beats to relax study to if they wanted. On that note, Nico's shop music is just, I hear something like this, and I don't know, I just want to go out and make the world a better place through my charitable contributions. Good thing the song ends though, because I can never do that. I'm glad the first Urizen theme is good, because you hear it 3 separate times. Voltic Black Knight, they didn't have to go this hard with a random boss theme, but they did, bless their souls. The final fight with V's Familiars is a remix of Nightmare's theme from DMC1, which is a nice touch. The duel is about as good as you could ask for with a classic Dante vs. Vergil theme. It may not hold a candle to their battle themes from DMC3, but it's absolutely no slouch on its own, and it still goes hard. Legacy is great, but I find it weird that this is apparently one of the main themes of the game. It does play during arguably the most important cutscene of the game, but for one of the main themes, I expected it to pop out throughout the game more, like Devil Trigger did. Not the whole song at once, maybe just tidbits of a recognizable melody. It does appear as an instrumental during the start of Nero and Vergil's fight, which is pretty cool. I don't think enough games nowadays realize how important it is to not just have good sound design, but top-tier sound design. A good soundtrack is part of that, but everything else surrounding it is equally as important. Every movement has to feel swift, every hit has to feel impactful, and every line has to be read to get the player to feel for the characters present. I think DMC5 exceeds on all fronts regarding sound design. Most returning characters are accompanied by their returning voice actors. Ruben Langdon as Dante, Johnny Young Bosch as Nero, and Daniel Southworth as Vergil. Brian Hanford is the voice of V, and might I say, he has a delightfully soothing voice.
You know your endless worshipping isn't making the Sparta any happier.
I would not mind listening to him read me a bedtime story every night. How it looks too, I could reach out and grab Dante and just give him a big fat kiss. I'm not huge on realistic graphics in games. I much prefer an appealing aesthetic or art style that makes the game stand out rather than just it looking like real life. I don't mind it here though, it looks fantastic. It goes for the animations as well. Lots of style, flash, and flare, and the sound design is a big part of what makes those so good. I already talked about Nero's Devilbringer, but every other character has plenty of style of their own. V can take advantage of taunts much easier than other characters during his combat segments, and his longer taunts are just amazing. You don't know true power until you have all three of your familiars out at once, and then you just start conducting. Every time you activate your Sin Devil trigger with Dante, the camera pans over to him as his sword impales him, and then he just explodes and you kill everyone. This is your big game-changing superpower buff, and the game wants you to know it. Of course, how could I talk about style without mentioning Judgment Cut End? I don't have much to say. Just look at it. Don't discount the smaller moves either. Every move in this game looks good enough to be a wallpaper. It's clear how much effort the devs put into each simple attack to make them look as flashy as possible. The taunts too, gotta love the taunts. Enough about the style for now. How about the substance? In the main campaign, there's 3 playable characters, Nero, V, and Dante, with the 4th playable character Vergil getting the same campaign all to himself. Each of the main 3 protagonists get a decent amount of levels to themselves spread across 20 different stages.
Who brought the marshmallows? 'Cause I'm bringing the fire.
You start off with Nero, who has been exponentially improved from the last game. He still rocks his sword, the Red Queen, and his gun, the Blue Rose, but now lacks an arm. Thanks to his trusted engineer friend Nico, he's able to equip robotic arms called Devil Breakers to try and get the job done. Each one has a unique standard attack and a charge attack. Most of them have more moves than that, but each one at least has these 2 moves. The charge attacks are typically big damage dealers and will break after 1 use. Devil Breakers greatly change the way Nero approaches his enemies, but they're also incredibly fragile. Getting hit while using an attack will cause it to break instantly. This makes decision making and awareness of your surroundings far more important compared to other characters. I love going guerrilla mode with some of these attacks, but I can't count the number of times that an enemy came out of left field in the middle of my attack and broke my Devil Breaker, causing me to change up my entire strategy and causing mass panic. They're high risk and high reward, but well worth the time to master. There's quite a selection to choose from, 13 in total. A few of them are purchasable DLC, but you unlock the main 8 as you naturally progress through the game. You start the first level with Overture. The standard attack is a giant palm thrust. Depending on where the enemy is, it'll adjust the angle accordingly to their position. I never found a super good place in combos for this one, except at the end. The charge attack grabs an enemy and plants a remote bomb on them. You can wait for it to explode automatically, or you can shoot it with a bullet to make it explode on command. This does quite a bit of damage and creates room for new combo opportunities. I found this one kind of hard and inconvenient to use. Against combat enemies, this is essentially a waste, as they can go down pretty quickly with standard attacks. And a lot of bigger enemies aren't affected by the knockback of the explosion either because they're too heavy, they teleport, or both. I got the most use out of this on boss fights, but they suffer the same problem of most of them being far too heavy for the explosion to launch them. It's a nice way to tack on some good damage, but you can't take full advantage of it against most bosses. I did get some decent mileage out of it against Vergil of all bosses, because he's light enough to be launched, and has plenty of openings to capitalize off of. Even then, I still had to tread lightly because I couldn't plant the bomb and detonate it in the same combo. If I plant the bomb on him, and then he decides to Devil Trigger and negate all knockback, I'm out of luck. But those times where I was able to combo him, greatest feeling in the world. The detonation plus a max charge shot creates insane airtime. You can even combo this into a super slow showdown move. It's basically impossible to land because of how slow it is, but with the Overture bomb and charge shot, you can land it pretty easily. And I think that's pretty cool. I think Overture is good overall, just a bit hard to use to its fullest because of how it works. Before I forget, you can also manually detonate each Devil Breaker with an explosion. This is mainly a panic option for if you get overwhelmed, as your Devil Breaker will likely break anyway, but I never used it much for that purpose. It does have some nice combo potential if you got arms to spare though. Gerbero is primarily a movement-based Devil Breaker. It does have a standard attack, a little Shockwave Blast, but the main appeal of it is the moves you can do while running. By holding any direction and then using the Devil Breaker attack, Nero will boost himself forward and upward with a tiny rocket jump. He can do this in the air too, letting him alter his jump arc without committing to any big moves.
Something distinctly lacking from the series until now, outside of teleports. The blast also pushes back nearby enemies and can potentially drag them along for a very long ride. The charge attack is a giant laser. Not much nuance, it's just a giant laser. It can be kind of hard to use because of the duration, but with the right positioning, it can demolish hordes of enemies. There's not as much death with this one compared to Overturn, but it's fun. I love bouncing around stages compared to running. DMC hasn't ever been known for its refined movement options, so this is a huge breath of fresh air in my book. Punchline is a rocket arm. Unfortunately, he doesn't actually yell rocket punch when he throws it out. It tracks an enemy and hits them for an extended period of time before returning to Nero. This standard attack might just be the most amazing thing Nero has. Once you throw it out, smaller enemies will get put in hit stun the entire time the rocket arm is hitting them. You can then follow it up with pretty much whatever you want. Nero's entire arsenal is available for you to use on an utterly helpless opponent. Custom combos are present everywhere in Nero's kit, but I think they excel the most when using Punchline. After throwing it out, you can hold the button down while it returns for Nero to jump on the arm and ride around like a hoverboard. I never use this much, but the sheer fact that it exists, it makes it the coolest thing ever. He's got a few attacks present here, but it's a bit hard to control to begin with, so I only ever used it as an escape option when I was in panic mode. The charge attack though, this is something else. Nero winds up for a second before unleashing a nuke of a punch onto an enemy. Out of all the charge attacks, I found this one more useful than most. It's not super slow like some others. It lets Nero hover in midair while he winds up, and the damage is insane. You still can't normally fit it into combos because of the slow startup, but that problem can easily be relieved when used in combination with other Devil Breakers. More on that in a bit. Punchline very quickly became my favorite of Nero's Devil Breakers. The standard attack functions like a traditional round trip, which is a move I use literally all the time as Dante because it opens up combo opportunities exponentially. Helter Skelter is probably the worst Devil Breaker in my eyes. There's one standard attack where Nero thrusts forward. You can mash the button for added hits and damage, and for what it's worth, the damage is pretty good. The Break Gauge move is essentially a big version of that. And that's it. The main appeal of this breaker is that its main attack is great for piercing through shields and armor, like when facing Angelos or Behemoths. That's really the only useful scenario I can see it being used for. The main attack does good damage, but keeps Nero in place forever, leaving him very wide open to attack, which could easily cause your breaker to shatter. I guess the continuous onslaught of attacks could make it good against enemies that are weak to counterattacks, primarily Furies, but even then, Nero has much more consistent and efficient methods of dealing with enemies like those. I kinda just wish there was more to this one. It's strong in that one use case of shields and armor, but it isn't very strong outside of that in any regard. Tomboy is a fun one. Instead of granting new moves on its own, it acts like an install, where you first need to activate it to access its moveset. The moves it does have are all these giant area attacks that are a bit hard to control, mainly because you lose your ability to lock onto enemies. You just have to hold the stick in their direction and hope it hits. Because it's an install, if you get hit at any point while it's active, even if you're not doing a move, the Devil Breaker will shatter. That makes it a bit more risky than most to use, but as long as you're smart about it, you'll be fine. It has a standard sweeping attack that covers a decent area in front of you, a thrust forward that also launches you in the air, and probably my favorite air attack to use in the game. Nero just spins down, doing constant damage, only to bounce back up in prime position to do it again immediately. I'm not a huge fan of how the gun works though. Nero stands in place and charges up a big beam, similar to the Gerbera Break Gauge move. It's alright if you can find an opportunity to use it, but because I'm always holding down my gun button for his regular charge shot, I end up forgetting I'm holding it down when I activate Tomboy, and then get stuck in the long animation and can't even make much use of it. I used a lot of Tomboy in early game, and I think that's where it shines the most, when you still need to unlock most of Nero's best moves and still can't figure out the combat. It's a good random bullshit go mode that nullifies a lot of smaller enemies and hordes. I just wish it was a bit more lenient when activating and deactivating, so you can more smoothly transition between your regular moveset with the Red Queen and Tomboy, creating combos across both weapons. The Break Gauge move isn't anything special. It functions almost the same as the normal install, but grants Nero immunity to his Tomboy breaking if he's hit in return for it breaking naturally after a set amount of time. I didn't really find this too useful because I think Nero is at his best when he can freely use his Red Queen as a base and all other weapons as complementary tools. The Break Gauge move makes the Tomboy his base and he's restricted out of all of his other tools, and I don't think a slightly better defense is worth losing that. It's not a bad breaker by any means. I quite enjoyed my time with it, but I think it could have used a bit more time in the oven. Buster Arm is stupid. I hate this breaker so much, but I also love it. It functions exactly like Nero's Devil Bringer from DMC4, and later in this game once you unlock it. You grab an enemy and do a unique animation as you grind them to dust. The only difference is that it does considerably more damage than his normal bringer. And when I say considerably more, I mean considerably more. I don't think I ever used the normal attack when I finally started using the Buster Arm. I just exclusively went to the Breakage move. Although it breaks after one grab, it also guarantees a kill on any normal enemy once you grab them. I can't exaggerate how much of a blessing this is, because I don't think I would have gotten through Dante Must Die without it. The enemies on this difficulty take forever to kill, and I think it would have kept beating me down with every loss because of how long each fight takes and how many Devil Breakers I normally go through in those fights. Now, if I see a group of enemies, it's as simple as jumping above them, wire grapple, and using a Buster Arm. Even with insta-kills, this doesn't make every fight free. Some enemies still need to get quite a beating before they can be grabbed, which means you can't always run in immediately and get your grab right then and there. Some enemies are so hard to get into a grabbing state, I just don't even bother with them. Hell Judecca are actually the worst enemy ever to exist in any game. I also don't think the insta-kill damage should have been translated over to boss fights. It removes a lot of the unique strategies they have in favor of big damaging combo finisher move. Like, why am I able to do a fourth of Vergil's health in one hit? That just doesn't seem right. The Buster Arm is definitely the most volatile Devil Breaker of them all, but I can't help but love it because it saved my sanity during the higher difficulties. Rawhide is a bit of a strange one. It has a few standard attacks where Nero whips a wire around him, but you can also time a button press to get consecutive targeted attacks. It's kind of like a baby's first judgment cut in that sense. The charge attack is a quick grab where Nero throws the enemy around. It is invincible the whole way through, which would make it a good panic option if you didn't need to charge it and then risk having it break to begin with, so other than that, seems pretty standard. It also has some quality of life enhancements attached to its snatch ability. It has better range and deals damage when pulling enemies in. I didn't use this one much until near the end of my time with the game, and even then I still used other breakers over it, but I do like what it has to offer. The wide standard attacks provide good area coverage, and the timed attacks deal pretty good damage while still increasing the style ranking. There's probably a lot more to this one than I realized, but I just found it alright. Ragtime is the last of the Devil Breakers in the base game. This one, like the Buster Arm, is incredibly useful, but mainly for the Breakage move. The normal attack is kind of pitiful. It creates a small time bubble that slows down enemies inside it, but it's so small that it's barely useful against a big horde. And against singular enemies, you're better off with almost any other Devil Breaker. The Breakage move though, beautiful. Ragtime breaks as it slows down everything around Nero. For normal enemy encounters, this lasts about 11 seconds, and for boss fights, it is about 5 seconds. The time stop allows so many new opportunities. You name it, you can probably do it while Ragtime is active. My favorite thing about this though, is that it allows Nero to work other Breakage moves into his combos. I mentioned the punchline Breakage move before, being a huge rocket-propelled punch, with the caveat being that it's super slow. Well, with Ragtime, you can land it pretty easily. My favorite strategy when fighting Malphus is to go in with 4 Ragtimes, 4 punchlines, and just repeat this process. It's much more fun than just stunning her and using the charge Buster Arm for broken damage. It makes it interesting because it requires more risk. Aside from the ones I just went over, there are also a handful of Devil Breakers available as DLC. These ones are mostly just one-trick ponies or gimmicks, but I'll go over them anyway. The Mega Buster is a recreation of Mega Man's iconic weapon of the same name. It has a standard attack that lets you fire pellets at a rapid speed. By waiting a brief moment in between shots, the Mega Buster will automatically charge up and do a more powerful shot. The Breakage move is the charge shot, which doesn't do that much damage for what it's worth. I don't know why, but I'm a huge sucker for Mega Man related stuff despite not having actually played any of the games. Mega Man is my go-to outfit in Dead Rising games, and I listen to the soundtracks a decent amount. The Mega Buster is far from the strongest Devil Breaker, but I can't help myself with it. It's just cool. They even changed Nero's jump to the classic weird Mega Man jump. And at the start of levels, he teleports in, and when he dies, he explodes. It's just cool, man. I love it. Gerbera GP01 is interesting. It has all the movement options of the normal Gerbera, but removes the attacks. In their place, he gains even more movement options. He can now shoot himself straight up from the ground and straight down while in the air. I honestly prefer this over the original Gerbera. The only reason I ever did use the original Gerbera was for the movement options, so seeing the attacks replaced with more movement options is a huge plus in my eyes. They still share the same Breakage move, so if you still need to shoot a big laser, it's got you covered. I never really used normal Gerbera after locking this. I love it, it's great. Sweet Surrender is easily the worst Devil Breaker. Its standard attack doesn't do any damage, but instead, it heals you. It's on a short cooldown, so you can't just spam it. The Breakage attack also just heals you. And, I don't know, healing yourself like this just seems like a crutch. Maybe on my first playthrough I would have used it, but I didn't get the DLC till after that. On higher difficulties, you need the attack power of the other Devil Breakers. The good ones do so much for Nero that it's impossible to ignore their potential damage output as opposed to a small amount of healing on your part. Especially on Dante Must Die. If I get hit once on this difficulty, chances are I'm just restarting the whole level because that no damage bonus is mandatory for some of these S ranks. Sweet Surrender is just a gimmick. But unlike some of the other Devil Breakers, it doesn't even have the decency of being a good one. I have no idea what to think about the Pasta Breaker. The standard attack shoots out a fork similar to Punchline. It's much weaker, but that's not all it does. It also changes the order of your current Devil Breaker loadout, moving the next cube breaker to the back. This is really weird. Apparently, it was a common complaint online that Nero couldn't swap between his Devil Breakers freely like Dante can switch styles, and yeah, restrictions like that can be annoying. But if Nero could do that, how would he be unique from Dante in any regard? Being able to swap between them would make him way more complicated, which goes against his easy-to-understand nature compared to Dante. I think it's much more interesting that Nero has to manage a set loadout. It makes the player think more strategically before going into a level. You could use your Break Gauge move early on in the level, but then you have to consider what Devil Breakers you've got coming up next and how they can help you get through a fight. It's like Dante before he could switch his styles freely. It made you consider the pros and cons of each before going into a level. And while I do love style switching as much as the next guy, I think a restriction like this can be just as interesting. With that being said, I guess Pasta Breaker was meant to throw a bone to the players who still wanted Nero to be able to swap his Devil Breakers freely. The fact that it only rotates one spot makes it kind of hard to use effectively. When I go into a level, I try to consider the chemistry of my loadout beforehand. For example, one of my main loadouts started with a Ragtime in front, followed by an Overture. The Break Gauge move of Ragtime allowed me to easily rack up combos, or if it's a boss fight, attach Overture's bomb onto a boss. However, I want to take precautions in case my Ragtime doesn't work as well as I thought it would, or I get hit while charging it, causing it to shatter. If that happens, my Ragtime is wasted, and now I have to consider what I can do with the Overture and the next Devil Breaker line. In this case, I prefer Punchline. Thinking about your loadout beforehand like this is the most interesting part of Nero's gameplay. Pasta Breaker just goes against that by being a gimmick, but it's not even a good gimmick because it only switches one of your Devil Breakers. I would honestly prefer it if it didn't switch them at all because the Break Gauge move is kinda broken. Pasta Breaker is an interesting experiment, just not very well thought out. It's a fine novelty, but you'll never catch me using it unless I'm doing some sort of challenge run. Lastly, we have Monkey Business. It's just a skin for Helter Skelter. It functions the exact same, but it has bananas instead of drills. You also can't buy it from the shop. I don't know, man. As funny as it is, I wish it was a skin for literally any other Devil Breaker due to how little I used Helter Skelter. If you ever wanted to skin people with bananas though, then I guess this is the weapon for you. That took way more time than I initially anticipated, so I'll try to wrap everything about Nero up here. Devil Breakers are cool and I really like them. Even the ones I don't like, I can acknowledge as serving some niche purpose in the game that I'm just not super fond of personally. In case you were wondering, I know you weren't, here's a tier list of all of them. Consider this subjective fact because my opinion means more now that I put it in video form. Nero's combat was in desperate need of a game changer from DMC4, and it got just that. I think the fact that you can't switch Devil Breakers in the heat of the moment really makes you consider what kind of layout you want going in beforehand, and encourages you to experiment with what you find most effective. I like that. Sometimes giving the player the option to use everything at once isn't the best idea because that's exactly what Dante does. But still, I feel like Nero is definitely lacking something. I don't know what, but he just doesn't give me the same fulfillment that I get when I butcher enemies to pieces with Dante, or explode bosses off this plane of existence with Vergil, and hell, sometimes I even prefer V's whack-ass gameplay to Nero. I don't want to say Nero's bad or anything, he's far from it, but while the Devil Breakers added some much-needed variety to his gameplay, his base moveset is still pretty mundane and boring. This isn't the fault of the Devil Breakers, but rather everything else about him. Enter the Exceed system. Through the Exceed system, Nero can rev his sword up like an engine to store up EX gauges. These will enhance his next moves or move that he uses because he can store up to 3 at a time. But also, some moves will use every gauge you have stored, which makes storing multiple a bit redundant aside from a bit more strength. Having to stop and manually charge each gauge sounds awful, and it is, but thankfully, by inputting the Exceed button right after an attack connects, Nero will automatically fill one of the gauges. And with perfect timing, all 3. These enhanced moves will boast new animations and often pack a bigger punch than normal. However, all of these moves, Exceed or not, behave almost the exact same either way. The only difference between them is a slightly different animation and maybe more damage. What I originally thought with this system is that they would potentially open up new combo routes, giving the moves different properties and entirely new ways to use them. But no, your combos are essentially the exact same, Exceed or not, but you might do a bit more damage with some EX gauges built up. This mechanic is just boring. There's nothing deep about it, there's no cool way to make use of it, it's just slightly enhanced versions of already existing moves. That's it. I think the worst part about it is that because it doesn't change your combos drastically and only adds a damage increase, there technically isn't any reason not to use it. You have the choice to not mash Exceed right after Nero does every move, but whoops, now you're missing out on potential damage buffs, and getting a lot of those in quick succession can add up nicely. But then that means there's no interesting choice to make. You are objectively not playing the game optimally if you don't go for Exceed every moment you can. And for that reason, I don't think it's a good mechanic. I used it as much as I could, but my fingers could only take so much, and I don't regret ignoring it down the line. In a game about creating custom combos and experimenting with moves to find your own path to success, there is nothing good gained with this mechanic. So, the Exceed system is still not that great despite how easily you can get EX beams stored, and I hate holding my finger on the bumper every second during every level so I can build up a charge shot. I love playing as Nero in the moment, but looking back, I think he still has a lot of ground to cover as a fully fledged, worthwhile character of his own. But for this game, I'll take it. That's a problem for a future game to handle. I've talked about Nero for way too long now, and thankfully, this next character won't take up nearly as much time.
Not in this lifetime. As the air to a bird, or the sea to a fish, so is contempt to the contemptible.
V is the only newcomer in this game, and he plays way differently than any other DMC character to date. Instead of fighting head-on like everyone else, he plays like a puppet master of sorts. He has these two familiars at his disposal in the form of Griffin and Shadow. You can control each familiar with a respective button, somewhat similar to handling a melee plus a ranged weapon. Shadow acts as a more melee-based one, with each attack stemming from him but boasting a ton of range. He has some normal combos you can perform as well. Griffin acts as the ranged expert. His moves are pretty mediocre on their own, but you can charge them up to increase their power exponentially. For instance, he can make lightning linger on screen for a good 5 seconds or so with Checkmate, and while that's out, you can charge another one to get it up right as the other one disappears. The most important thing of note regarding V is his combo game, or rather, a lack thereof. V is incredibly unique in that his playstyle is different from every other character in the DMC franchise. Because he himself only has a few very weak attacks that are primarily only used for killing enemies, Shadow and Griffin have to do all of the work. This means V has to hang back and simply focus on not getting hit. In that sense, it's kind of like a tower defense game, in a sense. You control the familiars to keep enemies away from a mostly helpless V. If this was all there was to it, I could understand why V got a lot of the hate he does in some parts of the internet. But there is quite a bit of nuance to flesh out V's otherwise simple game plan. The first of these is his Devil Trigger. Instead of a speed and damage boost like the typical Devil Trigger would bring you, V instead summons a new familiar in Nightmare. Nightmare is a giant hulking beast. His attacks are slow, but deal massive damage and cover a very wide area. With him up, you can worry less about being swarmed by enemies. You can't control him directly, but he should typically do moves that work in your favor. You can mount him to control him manually for a short time, but I never found this move too useful unless I wanted to use his giant laser move on command. Mounting him and still trying to control Shadow and Griffin is way too exhausting on the brain. It also locks you out of another important tool in your arsenal, the book. When using the book, V will pull out the book and start reading. Your movement speed is gutted while this is active, and doing any V-specific attacks or jumping will cancel it out. But the upside is that while V is reading, you slowly gain Devil Trigger. The rate you gain it is very, very slow, which makes it challenging to use when Nightmare isn't up. However, when Nightmare is up, the book will cause Devil Trigger gauge to drain significantly slower than normal. So, to make the most of Nightmare, you have to leave yourself at your most vulnerable state. It makes the gameplay interesting, because even though you have a giant hulking mass to deal with annoying enemies for you, to keep him out for a decent amount of time, you need to use the book. So while controlling both Shadow and Griffin, you need to do your best to deal with decreased walk speed to keep your damage sponge alive. Not to mention, you still need to kill enemies as V. You can't play keep away the whole time, you need to go in every now and then. None of the familiars can kill enemies on their own, only V can. I think this makes the gameplay incredibly engaging and interesting, keeping you on your toes at all times. I think that about sums up everything worth knowing about V. He has style, he has grace, and his playstyle is about controlling space. He's very different from every other DMC character, but not in a bad way. It is a bit weird seeing a character like him in a high-octane combat series, especially when he's not the one doing the attacks, but I think it works. I love his familiars, I love his design, and I love his theme. Crimson Cloud is a bop. From my understanding, people hate him a lot for his distinct differences from typical DMC characters, a hate that was much more vocal around the time of release. And I can understand it to a degree. I had some trouble starting out with V, but I think that's mainly because he feels like dog shit to play when you have no Devil Trigger to work with. Once you get a decently sized Devil Trigger gauge, it's much more fun to play around with him, but he definitely suffers in the early game more than other characters. I won't be opposed to his gameplay returning, but there's issues with his actual character which I will dive into later.
So, you're the strongest in the litter. Looks like we're gonna need a bigger leash. Come.
Dante is rocking as much style as ever. Weirdly enough, this is the game where he has the least amount of styles, only coming with the 4 base styles: Gunslinger, Trickster, Swordmaster, and Royal Guard. To be fair, Quicksilver and Doppelganger were more gimmicky than the other styles, and Darkslayer didn't have a ton of options. They were still decently cool, so it is strange to see Dante only having the 4 base ones. However, I can't complain too much about Dante, because although he has the least amount of styles he's ever had, he has more style than ever in this game. Along with the 4 styles, throughout the course of the game, he will end up equipped with 4 melee weapons and 4 guns. Some of these are automatic upgrades to weapons you already have. This applies to the Kalina and the Rebellion. The Kalina gets an upgrade where Dante can dual wield it with the Kalina 2, and the Rebellion gets replaced by the Sparta once Dante finds it, followed by both swords fusing into the Devil Sword Dante. For these weapons specifically, I'll only really touch on their final upgraded versions. Although the Rebellion and Sparta have some minor differences from Devil Sword Dante, they're not really worth picking them over Dante's new trademark sword. And there's literally no reason to pick either Kalina over the double Kalina combo. So on that note, let's talk about Devil Sword Dante. It has a lot of the moves you'd expect, like the grounded strings, Helmbreaker, Stinger, etc. What makes the sword incredibly unique is how it utilizes the Swordmaster style. Instead of Dante actually swinging his sword around when the button is pressed, Dante utilizes summoned swords similar to Vergil. These swords can perform a few of Dante's signature moves on their own, like basic combos and Stinger. These moves are a bit hard to use in combos due to their low hit stun and how they feel somewhat detached from Dante, like how V's gameplay works, but I can forgive all of that because of one move: round trips. Round trips! This single move turns this weapon from just another sword into the primary way of dishing out major damage. Because Devil Sword Dante doesn't have a traditional round trip where he throws the sword out like a boomerang, instead the summoned sword can be used to perform round trips. This is far better than normal round trip too, because Dante has full access to everything he wants while the summoned swords are still wailing on his enemies. I swear, you can't even land some of his moves normally without first using round trips. The length throughout is perfect for Crazy Dance. You can build up a full charge with Balrog and get a real impact out for a mega damage. It's just insane. You think of something outrageous you can't do normally with Dante, just pop these babies and you can probably do it. This game was already fairly open in terms of how you structure your combos, but this singular move breaks any barriers remaining and lets you do literally anything. Other than that, Devil Sword Dante has a fairly similar moveset to his other swords. Some of his typical Swordmaster exclusive moves have been implemented into his normal moveset due to Swordmaster now using summoned swords. It is kind of weird, like, I'm not using this hyper delay timing just to get out a prop shredder when I could just use high time. You can also hold down your primary attack button to use even more summoned swords and perform swords formation at the cost of some Devil Trigger meter. These swords come out automatically and enhance all of your moves, but what makes them great is they overlap with all your other melee devil arms as well. It not only increases your overall damage by a great amount, but opens up new combo opportunities as well. Devil Sword Dante is a pretty generic weapon enhanced by how great round trips and sword formation is. These tools not only make it a great weapon to use on its own, but also makes it not only recommended, but highly encouraged to cycle through in at some point during a combo to get its better moves out. Balrog is the obligatory gauntlet weapon of this title. It's easily one of the most unique weapons in not only this game, but the series as a whole. Instead of Balrog just having a basic gauntlet moveset we've seen repeated 3 times now, It takes the old moveset and divides it across two different modes, blow and kick mode. Blow mode consists of all its punch-related moves, while kick mode consists of all its kick-related moves. You can switch between them freely on the ground or in the air with a simple input of lock-on, back plus attack. Each mode has many moves from his old Gauntlet movesets, but they also have a lot of new moves as well. Because of how spread out certain moves are, you'll need to manage switching between modes during combos, as well as making use of his wacky Swordmaster attacks. It's not as simple as kick mode, kick, blow mode, punch, because all the kicks and punches both specialize in different areas. The kick moves typically have great area coverage, making it easier to deal with hordes, while also being slower and dealing greater damage in fewer hits, while the punch moves are quicker and more focused, doing big damage only after a large number of hits connect, and being better utilized on single targets. This doesn't mean there aren't any fast kick moves or highly damaging punch moves, it's just what each mode specializes in. This can make combos a bit hard to get a hold of, and panic scenarios can often lead to your death if you aren't used to each mode's specific moves, but it is highly rewarding once you do master it. On top of the two modes, Balrog also has a unique mechanic in the form of Ignition. Once Ignition is active, a fire effect will be active on Balrog, increasing the damage of every move, changing the properties of a few moves, and unlocking a highly damaging kick combo. The way you get Ignition up is different for each mode. In kick mode, it's as simple as holding down the attack button. Dante does a little dance as it powers up. This is great for when you're about to head into a battle, but unreliable once you're already in one. In that scenario, switch over to blow mode, where you can get Ignition up simply by hitting enemies. Ignition is integral to maximizing your use of Balrog, which means that whenever you get the opportunity, you need to incorporate blow mode into your combos, not just to get Ignition, but to maintain it as well. Many of your most powerful moves are in kick mode, but you can only keep Ignition active by using blow mode moves. One thing that is consistent across both modes is a huge combo window you gain access to during Ignition. Kick mode unlocks Pyromania, a long series of kicks that dishes out damage like nobody's business. Blow mode has real impact, the traditional Shoryuken super-esque move. With all of this to keep in mind while using Balrog, it makes it one of the most engaging devil arms in the series to date. I'm a sucker for these gauntlet-type weapons, and this one goes above and beyond to make itself stand out and reward the player for maximizing both modes and Ignition to the fullest. I pray it comes back in DMC6. Cavalier is definitely the strangest devil arm to be featured here. It's a motorcycle that Dante splits in half and uses the tires as buzzsaws. This weapon is the epitome of slow moves that do big damage. It utilizes a unique mechanic with said moves in the form of gear wheel. By holding the button down during Cavalier's moves, the buzzsaws will linger and do much more damage than normal. However, you can also time the button presses to increase the damage of your next attack. There are 3 timings with this, with low gear increasing the damage a bit with a button press, top gear which increases the speed and damage a decent amount with a well-timed button press, and over top gear, which is the highest speed and damage boost you can get with a perfectly timed button press. I'll be honest, I never use this to its fullest. Not because it's bad, far from it, but I never realized how effective it could be in the right hands. I put much more of my time into the other weapons. I still found Cavalier very useful at a basic level. High Side is one of the best moves in the game, where Dante throws himself upwards in the air somehow, while also dishing out insane damage with 2 lingering buzzsaws. I found this to be great combo filler, along with a lot of Cavalier's moves. I think that's where it shines the most, in the middle of a combo. Not to start a combo, maybe sometimes to end a combo, but in the middle of the combo is where I found it most useful. Because it's slow, it's hard to get a good combo going with it at the start, and most of its moves lead perfectly into others depending on your next devil arm. Also, this weapon is just so damn cool. You are dual-wielding a motorcycle. The Swordmaster moves all involve Dante riding the damn thing as an attack. It's also useful for mobility, and when I say mobility, I strictly mean gaining height with high side so you can skip almost every enemy encounter in Mission 12. Cavalier is an awesome weapon, maybe not as useful as the others, but it has its place and is cool enough to be worth using. King Cerberus is the last melee devil arm, and it's very interesting. It's reminiscent of the normal Cerberus nunchucks from DMC3. Instead of just ice-based attacks like Cerberus, King Cerberus has ice, fire, and electric attacks. These are all performed with different button inputs. Regular attacks use ice, Swordmaster attacks use fire, and holding down either button will charge an electric attack and perform it once released. The Swordmaster attacks also have Dante attacking with a pole rather than nunchucks. All the different types of attacks have different primary uses. The ice attacks are all quick, but generally have the shortest range of them all. They're the best for combos. If you're doing a King Cerberus only combo, then these attacks will take up most of your attention. It has almost every tool you need for combos too. The ground combos are nice and lengthy with good damage. Crystal is a great launcher that enables air combos. Revolver is a nice up-close burst option on the ground or in the air, and so on. The Swordmaster fire attacks are often slower, but do way more damage.
I think this is most apparent with Hot Stuff. This move shreds enemies, especially Furies. It's a godsend against them if you set it up right. However, these moves are also generally harder to implement into your game plan, mostly because of their slow speed and low combo potential. Like, you can get some use out of Combo C and Rockback, but you are never using Combo D. It's insane how this move was even conceived. The damage is high if you land all the hits, but the combo takes so long that you're better off doing literally anything else. Pole play is also pretty hard to use, but it at least has a decent niche of changing Dante's jump arc when needed. I don't want to downplay the good aspects of these moves. They shine as damage engines, especially Hot Stuff, but they're much harder to implement into your normal game plan compared to the ice moves and even the electric moves. As for the electric moves in question, there's about twice as many compared to ice and fire combined. Because they're performed by holding down a button and releasing, there are standard moves and Swordmaster moves, with the former resembling the ice moves and the latter resembling the fire moves. They share similar traits with the moves they're based on, but with exceptionally more range. Long Revolver is just Revolver, but with more hits and damage, and covers a further distance, making it a way better burst option than the original. Most of these moves are completely original, making the electric attacks more utility-based. Kingslayer is basically an auto combo that lasts forever. Revolution is a nice panic option, not a lot of damage, but fast and covers a big area around Dante, saving him from danger if needed. Long Barrel is a very fast, very far-reaching one-hit lightning bolt that's insanely useful for combos. Thunderclap is really weird. It spawns in 3 slow, tracking electric orbs. It's a bit hard to make use of in combos, but you can get them up whenever and just have them active as a potential threat if you want. Although, there are times when I got these up and they caused me more harm than they did good. Like against Vergil. They got in the way of his summoned sword so I couldn't royal guard them for style points. They're fine, if a bit unconventional. Percussion. Percussion. Percussion is insane. It very easily sets up a crumple if used point blank. If all the hits connect, it does a lot of damage on top of that. It covers all around Dante, so the result can be devastating if used in the crowd. With all of these tools at your disposal, King Cerberus is a very versatile weapon, basically acting as 3 smaller weapons in the form of one big weapon. All 3 aspects of this weapon work well with each other and with the other Devil Arms, and even if you won't be using the fire moves quite as often as the ice and electric moves, they still serve a worthwhile purpose. Dante's up-close melee game isn't all that he excels in, because how can you have Dante without gunplay? Like his Devil Arms, he has 4 main guns to choose from. These aren't nearly as deep as his melee weapons because there's only so much you can do from a range, but they're all still great additions and worth mastering. Ebony and Ivory are Dante's classic handguns. They fire quick shots, dealing little damage overall. You can mash faster to do more damage, but personally, my hands can only take so much. Having Gunslinger active will automatically charge the charge shot, which is nice, but prevents you from using them too much at a time if you're looking for damage. They're alright, you can't really go wrong with them in any given situation, but in those same situations, there's likely a better option anyway. It can do some nice burst damage if you set it up right, mainly through Rainstorm. Honeycomb Fire can do some nice chunky damage as well. This is completely outclassed by another gun, but we'll get to that. Ebony and Ivory are the gun equivalent of whatever sword Dante is boasting in the game. It's pretty good at a lot of things, but its only real weakness is that it doesn't excel at any given thing. The practically infinite range is nice in some situations, and Rainstorm can be easily implemented into a combo, which is especially devastating with a charge shot. But like I said, there are better options. Coyote A is Dante's classic shotgun. It packs more power in a single punch than the handguns, but is much more straightforward. There isn't a lot going on with this gun, and it does pretty much what you'd expect. Pretty good damage, one shot at a time. Dante can also shoot behind himself for some reason. I don't think I ever used this move effectively a single time. It might be one of the most useless moves in Dante's entire kit. Fireworks has always been pretty useful, being a good short-ranged area coverage move. Gunstinger is also a pretty nice approach option. It functions similarly to Dante's Sword Stinger, but he does it with a gun. That arguably makes it cooler, but I guess I can't say for sure which is objectively better. The most interesting aspect of this shotgun is a series of movement options called Cut-In. Dante slides forwards and ends with a shotgun shot. This can be interrupted with a dodge roll to the side, giving it nice defensive and offensive capabilities. This is pretty cool, until you find out that you can practically do the same thing by just switching to Trickster, dashing forward, and firing a shot. Coyote A is pretty average overall. It's never been too amazing, but it doesn't strive to be, and that's fine. It doesn't have a huge move pool, as it's already effective with the few moves it has. Like Ebony and Ivory, it's nice and reliable, but there are better options in most situations where you would want to use it. Although you technically get the double Kalina Ann last, you get the normal Kalina Ann before Dr. Foss, and then the double Kalina Ann is essentially just a more powerful up Kalina Ann.
so I'll talk about it now and save the best for last. It functions pretty much how you'd expect it to. If Ebony and Ivory are fast but deal little damage, and Coyote is a bit slower but deals more damage, then this is the next extreme, being extremely slow but dealing hefty damage. It doesn't have a ton of moves, but they're all decently useful. After a standard shot, you can hold down the button and then release it once Dante puts the two weapons together to fire a giant piercing beam. Aside from the actual load time, it comes out incredibly fast for how much damage it does. It's got some upgrade versions of moves from the normal Kalina Ann, like the double Hysterics. It's Hysterics, but 2. However, I don't care about any of that because Mega Cascade. This has a whole second of startup, but once it's ready, Dante fires a giant laser that does insane damage if all the hits connect. It pierces through armor, and with enough hits, it can even stagger an enemy. I relied on this move so much on higher difficulties. Seriously, it's such a saving grace against a surprising amount of enemies. And yeah, that's kind of it for double Kalina Ann. It does a lot of damage, covers a big area, leaves you incredibly vulnerable. It's up to you to evaluate the trade-offs between these 3 weapons based on speed and damage, but I think they all work well together. Anyway, none of that matters because we still have one more gun to talk about. Dr. Faust is one of, if not the stupidest weapon in the entire series. Instead of firing bullets, you fire red orbs. As in, the red orbs you've collected thus far through levels. This may seem kind of stupid at first until you realize how much damage it's truly capable of dishing out. The standard fire alone is enough to beat certain bosses. Let me repeat that. Just standing there, using a single move, is enough to beat entire boss fights. Obviously, this is at the expense of red orbs, which early on is something you need to consider a lot. Do you want to use the red orbs to demolish people with Dr. Faust, or do you want to unlock new moves for Dante to mess with instead? However, if you plan on playing the game more than once, this is a non-issue entirely. Hell, once you get everyone's special EX provocation, there's no reason to save up red orbs anymore. Everything else you can buy costs significantly less, and on higher difficulties, it's not hard to beat every level with a 50,000 red orb bonus. So now that you don't care about saving up red orbs, there's nothing stopping you from ripping and tearing through everything in your path. Now you may be thinking, the standard shot seems really good at dealing with single enemies, but what do I do when there's a whole lot of them? Fear not, as this weapon offers a simple solution to that scenario as well. You might be thinking is utilizing Dante's little hat throw, or the red orb shield, but no, it's much more effective than that. Red Hot Night. This is the single strongest move in the entire Devil May Cry series. Dante stands in place, charging up the attack while depleting your red orbs at a rapid speed. But once it's done, you're free to welcome your enemies to hell. Dante summons multiple giant meteors that deal insane damage and have a huge area of attack. This will instantly kill any enemy it makes contact with, including boss fights. Now, it's much harder to get this move up in a boss fight, but believe me, it's 100% possible and optimal. Mission 17 is a pain in the ass to play normally, especially when you're going for the no damage bonus. But Dr. Faust makes it a walk in the park. Kill Griffin and Shadow with the standard shot, then wait for Nightmare to spawn in. Charge up Red Hot Night. You win. It's that easy. This one move is so insanely broken that it's optimal to use on almost every normal enemy encounter you come across, because it deals with them instantly. As cool as this weapon is, I think that's my main problem with it. Once you get past the point where you care about red orbs, then you're not restricted by anything other than your own will to not use these insanely broken moves. And you know what? Before I had enough red orbs to use this whenever I pleased, I think I liked it more. I found it fun to try and put the hats on enemies so they would drop more red orbs. I found it fun to shield myself in red orbs to dish out extra damage and give myself some protection when needed. I found it fun to throw my hat out and let it shoot at enemies while I tried to do a combo. But now, I don't need to do any of that because the standard shot and Red Hot Night do literally everything you could want in a weapon. While very stylish and cool aesthetically, as well as providing us the greatest cutscene in all of gaming, Dr. Faust ultimately suffers from a lack of variety. Once you reach the point where you don't care about red orbs, you have nothing holding you back from unleashing its full power at any given point, removing most of what makes Dante interesting and unique in the first place. I would still love to see it return in a future title, but I think it needs some big changes if that's ever going to happen. Now that I've gone over his devil arms, I'd like to touch a bit more on his styles very briefly. These devil arms all have design strengths and weaknesses that can be played around using the different styles. Due to the fast-paced gameplay and the fact that you can switch styles whenever you want, in some scenarios, you'll be switching styles every second or so. Cerberus and Cavalier don't have great movement options, so using Trickster with them is a great idea. But at the same time, you'll want to find every opportunity to activate Swordmaster to activate your most powerful attacks. Same goes for Gunslinger. It's integral to certain combos to get these up for a split second only to switch to another. Royal Guard kinda stands in a league of its own, being the ultimate skill test for the player once they've mastered everything else. Trickster is typically the safe option to get out of harm's way, but Royal Guard can let you keep all your momentum without skipping a beat, as well as powering up the Royal Release, which is one of the most devastating moves you can access when powered up. Making use of all the styles balances out each Devil Arm, and can allow you to play Dante however you want with whatever weapon you want and then switch at a moment's notice. The style switching is truly the core of Dante's gameplay, and mastering it is very rewarding and satisfying. Dante's Devil Trigger returns, and I found it far more useful than in past games. I found myself switching in and out of Devil Trigger just for one or two moves that greatly get enhanced when it's activated. On top of that, he gets a new install in the form of Sin Devil Trigger. This is filled up by transferring your normal Devil Trigger gauge over to it, so basically, just do more damage to fill it up since that's how normal DT gets filled. Upon activation, Dante explodes and becomes a completely new character. He only has a few select moves, but those moves are absolutely devastating. I personally love Demolition, where Dante summons a black hole and dishes out damage like nobody's business, which is a trait shared by the Loose, which is basically a Dragon Ball Ki Blast barrage. But none of these can compare to Judgment, a move that hits literally everything on screen, stunning enemies and bosses while doing massive damage. It takes up your remaining gauge, but it's really easy to spend most of the timer on other moves and then use Judgment when you're about to run out. This move can completely change the tide of a battle and is very much worth using whenever you activate. However, this install functions very differently from normal Devil Trigger. Once you activate it, you can't deactivate it. You're stuck in this mode until the meter runs dry. This truly makes it an all-or-nothing, last resort type move. Since you'll need more than one full Devil Trigger gauge to fill it completely, it forces you to consider when you should start filling up, when you should use your normal Devil Trigger, and when you should spend it all on Sin Devil Trigger. There is an interesting side note on this though, the move Quadruple S, which allows you to enter Sin Devil Trigger for a brief moment, but only when your current combo rank is Triple S. This only gives you enough time to use one move, because if you don't deactivate in time, you'll be stuck and forced to use the rest of the meter. Thankfully, there are some moves that are quick and destructive enough to make this worth it. This is a great incentive for players to try and style up to make more effective combos than normal, but isn't too overpowered to where it wins you the fight outright. I think it's a great addition. Overall, Dante is arguably the best he's ever been in this game. While I have some issues with a few of his Devil Arms, I think they're all still great, and those problems are mostly balanced out when taking into consideration style switching. He has a number of options that he can use in any given situation, and it's up to you to figure out how you want to approach each of those situations. While Nero had this freedom to a degree, and V didn't have it at all, I can't really say I prefer him too much over the others. Freedom is great in a game like this, but Nero and V having restrictions in their gameplay that makes them thrive through a certain way of playing is still very enjoyable. Each of these characters has their place, and I love playing as each one of them. But of course, there is still one character I need to talk about.
There is no demon named Urizen. Only a man who threw away his humanity in an endless pursuit of power. He is Dante's older brother, and his real name is... What is this? Vergil.
Vergil is the most insane character I've seen in a video game, and playing as him is one of the most fun experiences I've ever had. You know those memes where it's like the boss character when you fight them versus when you actually play as them? Vergil is the exact opposite of that meme, because he only becomes truly broken when he's in your hands. Like his past appearances, he has 3 weapons, the Yamato, the Force Edge, and Beowulf. All 3 of these weapons got huge upgrades. Yamato might as well be a new weapon at this point, honestly. The Force Edge has become the Mirage Edge, which has a similar moveset but is now a giant summon sword. And Beowulf might be the most devastating weapon in the game. He only has one ranged weapon with the summon swords, but it's not like he needs insane range when he can just teleport to any enemy on screen. He has his concentration mirror from DMC4, and shares Dante's property of having both a normal Devil Trigger and a Sin Devil Trigger. Despite the similarities, Vergil is a completely new character in this game. There's a lot to cover, so I'll just get started with his Devil Arms. The glow up that Yamato got cannot be understated. In DMC3, it felt very oppressive to fight against, but had a limited moveset when you actually got to use it. It felt a bit better in DMC4, but now it's been perfected. Multiple grounded strings for easy combos, a launcher that actually leads to meaningful damage, and Judgment Cut. This single move is now the centerpiece of Vergil's entire kit.
Done by holding down a button and then releasing, Vergil can chain this move up to 4 times with frame-perfect timing. It's a bit hard because you have to hold the button down again for each individual judgment cut, rather than simply pressing the button again like in DMC3. Not only can these do massive damage on their own, but they can easily be implemented into combos as a starter, filler, or ender. You can also perform these judgment cut chains in the air, which just so happen to have very little startup and end lag even when it's not the frame-perfect version. It's genuinely insane how this singular move got such a huge upgrade and is now the centerpiece of Vergil's entire moveset. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Vergil has a relatively low skill ceiling, and you don't need to master the timing on this to get through battles with him, but I implore anyone who hasn't to please do it anyway. It will give you satisfaction and power like no other move in the game. Yamato has been buffed in other areas as well. They took most of the improvements he got in DMC4, slapped them in here, and unlike that game, it feels great. It's clean, fast, and precise. Aerial Rave B allows him to gain easy height during a combo, which can then let him set up all sorts of things with his summoning swords or other devil arms. One of my favorite new additions is the Void Slash. Vergil unsheaths the Yamato, slashes a great area in front of him, and then sheaths it again. It does no damage until Vergil actually sheaths the Yamato, and anything caught in the swipe takes a decent chunk of damage for just one move, as well as crumpling them instantly. This is pretty good in crowded fights for creating space, but can be used in combos as well due to the long pause as Vergil sheaths the Yamato. I could go on and on about the Yamato, but that's all I'll say for now. I left some stuff out intentionally to touch on it in a bit, but overall, Yamato feels so good to use now. Every move is quick and swift, the range and damage is unparalleled, and Judgment Cut is the cherry on top that brings Vergil's whole character together. Mirage Edge is a bit weird. And it's not a good weird like Cavalier. I don't want to say it's bad, because it's not, far from it. But I think the dev team got a bit too carried away with Yamato. Most of what made this weapon unique in the first place was how it had a lot of Dante's signature moves now put on Vergil, like Stinger, Helmbreaker, Round Trip, all that fun stuff. But now, a lot of those moves have an equivalent in the Yamato. In past games, I would find Force Edge most useful for its launchers and Helmbreaker to put enemies in the air and bring them back to the ground. It wasn't necessarily the best at combos on its own, but moves like Stinger were good for ending combos, or for closing the distance between you and an enemy, especially since Vergil doesn't mind launching enemies an entire screen length away, because he can just teleport up to them. But if we take a look at Yamato, now Upper Slash is a very reliable launcher, and it can also be done out of Rapid Slash, which has a giant forward advancing hitbox, along with Aerial Cleave, which is basically Helmbreaker in function. It takes away a lot of the unique utility of the weapon, and now turns it into both of these weapons do similar things, but Yamato is kind of better in almost every area. And again, I'm not at all trying to say it's a bad weapon, I still got plenty of mileage out of it. The more niche tools especially that are still unique to it are fantastic. Mirage Edge Combo B is my favorite standard combo in the game. It's brutal, lasts forever, and Vergil travels very far forward during it. The finisher also makes a great combo starter. Round Trip is alright. It was nerfed quite a bit in this game though. Instead of locking onto the opponent and sticking to them until it returns to Vergil, it now just stays in place. It makes it harder to use as a combo tool because I found enemies falling out of it to be very common when used in juggles. It's decent as a stationary hitbox just as a deterrent, but it definitely could be way better. Air Stinger is kinda funny. It's hard to use in combos in any kind of context, but it's pretty useful for movement and sniping those annoying green fly things out of the air. Drive is one of my favorite moves in the entire game. I love how different it is from Dante's, really showing Vergil's mastery of the weapon. While Dante's has long startup and decently quick follow-ups, Vergil's has quick startup, with a follow-up that can be charged if you need to time it during combos or if you want more damage. It's such an amazing combo ender if you need to create space, or, thanks to the teleport, just to add to your never-ending onslaught. While Mirage Edge is not as deep as I thought it would be, it is very much still worth your time to master. It may be the worst of Vergil's 3 Devil Arms, but you can still kick ass with it, even if some aspects of Yamato outshine it completely. Vergil's final Devil Arm is Beowulf. First things first, isn't it kind of weird how Vergil is still associated with this weapon? He only canonically had it during one boss fight, and then every time he has it as a playable character is non-canon. It's especially weird in this game. Since the Sparta doesn't exist anymore, Vergil has the Mirage Edge to compensate for that. But he doesn't do the same for Beowulf, despite not being in possession of it. I feel like something cool could have been done here. Since V has a standout spot in his moveset, which we'll get to, I think some nod to Yurzin would have also been cool. He uses punches and kicks during his final boss fight, so why not give Vergil some cool, spiky gauntlets based off Yurzin? Now, this doesn't affect my opinion of the weapon at all. It's just strange how Mirage Edge was made to compensate for Vergil not being able to hold the original weapon when he was literally only in possession of Beowulf once. Anyway, Beowulf is just as brutal as it's always been. Every hit is forceful and impactful, straight to the point. You can still charge most moves to increase their power, but interestingly, some moves are locked behind this charge. Most notably, Rising Star, Beowulf's main launcher, is now a follow-up to Kick 13. You can't charge Kick 13 for extra power, but holding down the button will cause Rising Star to come out after the initial move. I don't mind this much for this move, but they also did this to Straight, which was the Beowulf Stinger equivalent. It can now be used as a combo ender for Beowulf Combo B, and you can charge it individually from the rest of the combo. But having this as a combo ender kinda defeats the purpose of it being a quick, forward-advancing move. As a result, a move I used a lot as Dante in DMC3 is now something that I use so little I could count it on my fingers. It's not really like Vergil needs it, and it does implore you to swap weapons for situations where you would want a strong forward-advancing move, which encourages you to learn every weapon, and I can't be too mad at that. Freedom is great, but some restrictions are very much warranted. Regardless, Beowulf is your go-to melee specialized Devil Arm. Combos involving it typically do less hits, but only because Beowulf tends to do more damage per hit. Because its moves are pretty straightforward, like Mirage Edge, it can be a bit hard to incorporate some of the moves into combos. The grounded strings you can get are always insane. They're great at starting combos. Starfall is the classic dive kick, and while it's not quite what it was in DMC3, it's at least not the shit show that it was in DMC4. Lunar Phase is another move that can't be charged, but it's one of the best combo filler options in the game. Does great damage with a good hitbox, albeit a bit inconsistent, and when you just jump, you can do damage, which is Vergil's go-to counter against Furies, and is just a nice bit of damage you can get in randomly because you jump a lot in this game. While I do love this weapon, the fact you can charge attacks does pose a bit of a problem. It's kind of hard to implement these charges into combos at any point. This is especially true for Beast Uppercut, which does insane damage if you can charge it all the way, but that literally never happens. At least, not without looking at the rest of Vergil's kit. The summoning swords are once again Vergil's only ranged gun-like option. They got some needed nerfs, like the normal fire doing way less damage compared to past games, especially DMC3. They're not used for raw damage anyway. What they excel at is filling in the gaps in Vergil's gameplay. The special moves that utilize summoning swords basically fix any previous critiques I had on Vergil's gameplay. This is especially true for Beowulf. I previously stated that while charging moves is nice, it's very hard to implement into your combos. Allow me to introduce you to Heavy Rain Swords. A decently wide area in front of Vergil gets showered with summoning swords, stunning anything that gets hit for a significant amount of time, a couple seconds at least. Using this in a combo can easily allow for Beowulf charges mid-combo, including the aforementioned Beast Uppercut. While this helps Beowulf especially, you can use this in tandem with each of his other Devil Arms. Custom combos allowed you to do almost anything before, but with this move, you can do anything. The other moves Vergil can use with summoning swords are all still good, but are very much utility heavy. I'll be honest, I didn't touch them much outside of Heavy Rain Swords. I can't personally comment on how useful these other moves are in comparison, but I promise you there are some interesting uses you can make for all of them. The only downside to most of these moves is they can eat up your Devil Trigger gauge pretty quickly. Speaking of his Devil Trigger, it got a pretty insane overhaul. Like Dante, he has both a Devil Trigger and a Sin Devil Trigger. Unlike Dante, however, his Sin Devil Trigger doesn't require over a full Devil Trigger gauge to fill. They're roughly the same length. His Sin Devil Trigger is interestingly more functionally similar to a normal Devil Trigger from past games. It gives him a boost in damage and speed, as well as enhancing a good chunk of his moves. Meanwhile, his normal Devil Trigger functions like Dante's Doppelganger style from DMC3. It spawns in a Mirage clone of Vergil, who mimics every move he makes. You can manually choose how close he follows your movements, with either a huge delay or little to no delay after your initial input. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea how to use this. Doppelganger is easily the most complex part of Vergil's kit. It's quite daunting how many possibilities this opens. I'm sure it's just as broken as anything else Vergil has, and plenty of people have taken it upon themselves to find insane combos and utility for the unofficially named Steve. I wish I could say more about it, but I will say this. Doppelganger plus Judgment Cut can have my children. Vergil is just the gift that keeps on giving. He has one more noteworthy aspect worth mentioning in the form of the concentration gauge. This meter, in the very top left, above everything else, will fill up automatically over time. However, it only fills up during active combat, and even then, it'll only fill up if you're actively dodging or landing attacks. On the opposite end, it will start draining whenever you're hit, or whenever an attack you use doesn't hit anything. Also, for some reason, it will drain when you're simply walking around during a fight, even if that walking is helping you avoid combat by dodging. This can easily be negated by spamming jumps, because jumps not only have a bit of invincibility, but will fill up your concentration gauge even if you're not actively dodging attacks, for some reason. Anyway, there's 3 levels of concentration. The first level is this little notch here, the second level is the second notch, and the third level is when it's completely full. There are obviously unique perks that come with it, the first of which are passive buffs to all your devil arms when at level 3 concentration. I won't lie, these are kind of not bad, but not really worth the trouble of getting and then maintaining your level 3 concentration. Yamato gets more range, which is nice, but not really needed since it has pretty good range already. Mirage Edge gets more hits on every attack, which does increase its overall damage pretty noticeably, but since I never switched to it for more than a few attacks, I never really noticed the difference. All of Beowulf's chargeable attacks get a 3rd level of charge time. This is just bad. Yeah, okay, this one is just bad. It was already hard enough to get to the 2nd level of charge time for most of these moves and still fit it in a combo. And now there's a 3rd? The 2nd level charges were somewhat manageable because most of the ones you were using, aka only Beast Uppercut, could be comboed into with old reliable heavy rain swords. This 3rd level of charge would require you to dump so much more Devil Trigger gauge than it's worth. And besides, how many of these moves would actually be worth using even if the damage was worth it? You really want to stand there for 5 seconds charging a basic combo starter, only to then have to charge the next hit and so on? I love Beowulf, but this is just horrendous and only worth using if you want funny style points. Another perk of the concentration gauge is the 3 enormous moves you get once you reach level 2. By reaching level 2 and dumping your entire Sin Devil Trigger gauge, you can use one of 3 available super moves, with 1 available for each weapon. The most infamous one by far is Judgment Cut End, Yamato's super move. After a moment of charging up, Vergil quickly slashes in a great area around him before sheathing Yamato and everything getting hit at once. I won't say this is a bad move, far from it, just outclassed, which we'll get to. The range is noticeable, but this range comes at the cost of damage. This is most apparent against bosses, where it kind of sucks. Again, not bad, but very heavily outclassed by a certain other move that I'll talk about in a minute. It looks the coolest of the 3 at least. Always use this to kill if you can. The super move for the Mirage Edge is Deep Stinger, which is easily the worst of the 3. It does good damage, but over the course of many hits. It can be hard to get this up and finish it to completion without getting hit or before a boss can pop out of it. I don't really have anything else to say about it. It's not terrible, but for the resources needed to use it, don't use it. Hell on Earth. This might be the best move in the entire game. It's hard to compete with Red Hot Night, but that move takes years to actually charge up and come out. Hell on Earth has a second or two of startup before Vergil just erases a giant chunk of your opponent's health. It would really be a shame if you could get hit out of it before it came out. So good thing he's invincible during the entire move. Also, the move is so strong it will knock back any enemy or boss, even ones that are mountains taller than Vergil. So, it deals the most damage of any of Vergil's moves. It's completely invincible, so you can use it anytime you want, and it knocks every enemy in the game back, giving you ample time to regroup. You may be thinking that in some cases, it's better to use Judgment Cut End because of the range, and you're right, but do not discount Hell on Earth's range for even a second, because this move is like a nuke. It may not have the insane vertical reach of Judgment Cut End, but because of your invincibility, enemies will flock to you and get hit anyway while you're completely safe. The only bad time to use this move is when there aren't any enemies around. You will learn to love this move and use it any chance you get. It's broken, and I love it. This is just a side note. Although these moves consume your entire Sin Devil Trigger gauge, if you just activate it before using the move, it then only uses about a third of the overall gauge, so you can just use Hell on Earth 3 times in a row if you really wanted. This is kind of stupid and encourages you to never use these moves outside of Sin Devil Trigger, but whatever. The final perk of the concentration gauge is World of V. This move is fast and lasts a lifetime. Vergil stabs himself, separating V from his body, and then proceeding to do an automatic attack. The main appeal of this move is that it heals you based on how much concentration you have. See, when you use this move, unlike the 3 super moves, it actually drains your concentration gauge instead of just keeping it the same, so you can't just spam it. You actually need to consider the trade-offs when you use it. The health you heal is based on how much of the gauge is filled. At a full gauge, you'll recover 1/4 of your health. And as an addition, V will summon Nightmare and do more damage than normal. I really like the inclusion of V in Vergil's moveset. which makes me wonder if him being his own separate entity will be used in the future. It's a cool move, useful for the health regen and downtime it gives you to assess your options. Overall, this is easily the best iteration of Vergil, and despite Mirage Edge being far from my favorite Devil Arm, this is my favorite Devil May Cry character to play as ever. He's known for being broken, but he's a balanced kind of broken. It's not one thing he has that's uniquely very stupid, like Dante and Red Hot Knight. Instead, all his moves are just a decent amount better than every other character's moves for any number of reasons, and as a result, he's a complete monster. The best part about him is that you can play him any way you want. It's a bit off-putting for me who's recently been going through all these titles to see Nero as an easy character and Dante as a hard character. Vergil in this game can be as easy as you want, or as hard as you want. You can easily just spam Hell on Earth and get some good mileage out of it, perform some basic combos on the side and whatnot. You'll get pretty far doing that. But you're allowed to make this character as deep and as complex as you want. All his different summoning sword setups, his unique moves, and most notably Doppelganger, is one of the hardest things to master in any of these titles. Vergil is what kept me going through this game. I love Devil May Cry to death, but playing each difficulty back to back to back with the main 3 playable characters got really old. I always felt like Nero had nothing more to offer me and Dante would be at a level I couldn't get to unless I committed hours to practicing with him in training mode. I like V, but his playstyle is so wildly different that the skill it took to play him didn't translate to the other characters. Vergil was the remedy to my pain. I never felt like I wasn't getting value out of his more simple tricks, and because of this, each time I went back to Vergil, I felt motivated to learn more. I wanted to get better and improve, but could still rely on what I learned before as his basic tools are just as effective as his complex tools. He's the pinnacle of combat characters in my opinion, and is the reason I stuck with this game for as long as I did. While this is a combat game and combat is the main focus, there are still other aspects present worth talking about, because not all of them are quite as good as the main gameplay. Unfortunately, this top-tier combat system is stuck in some rather underwhelming level design. Now, DMC has never really had super solid level design. Most games actually have worse levels than DMC5. But while the levels in some previous games were bad, the levels here are just kind of nothing. Let's take a quick look at DMC3, the game that I would say had the best level design of the series. The biggest difference between these two games in terms of level design is the use of puzzles. Because DMC was originally going to be a Resident Evil game, the early titles share a lot of similar attributes, and one of those is how there's puzzles everywhere. These aren't super in-depth puzzles, they mostly boil down to bring object X to point Y, and then you can proceed. But what these kinds of puzzles accomplish is making these levels feel much more fulfilling than they actually are. Doing these somewhat tedious excuses for puzzles makes me feel like I'm accomplishing much more than I really am. It's these tiny victories that keep me occupied until the next fight, and help me keep going, not just the thought of the fight itself. Compare this to DMC5, where many levels are a simple straight line from start to end. Let's take a look at a few levels just to see how bland the design really is. Mission 1, you literally just run forward to a mini-boss and then the level ends. Saying that these levels are a straight line was a bit of an exaggeration to get my point across, but this level literally is a straight line. You can win by holding forward and jumping up until the mini-boss at the end. Mission 5, there's some twists and turns here and there, but little to no variation. Just run forwards to the boss fight. I like how the secrets are hidden, but overall, a very forgettable level. Mission 8, basically the prologue but longer. Just run forward until the game forces you to fight. Also, you have to wait on elevators to continue through the level instead of just being able to jump up, one of the most unnecessary level gimmicks ever. Mission 10, basically just Mission 8 but with Dante. This level is the absolute worst to S rank on Dante Must Die, so I have a special hate for this level due to how many times I had to play it. Ends with a boss fight you've already fought twice now. Mission 13, you jump down a hole and fight enemies. Repeat this 2 more times then the level is done. Mission 16, you jump down bigger holes and fight more enemies. Only difference is you can only play as Dante. As you can see, most levels are just variations of running forward, so naturally the best levels are the ones that stray away from that. Mission 3 is pretty alright. It makes use of Nero's grapple ability pretty well. Mission 11 makes some nice use of breaking those red orb things to unlock more of the level. It hides its secrets pretty well and has a good boss fight to top it off. Mission 12 makes some interesting use of branching paths that all link into each other. It is kind of easy to get lost, but it's not terribly hard level at the least. Some levels require multiple playthroughs because you can just choose from multiple characters at the start. Mission 7 is my favorite example of this. You can choose from either Nero or V at the start of the level. They have different paths they take, intersecting at certain points, where you might even be lucky enough to run to someone else playing online to help you out. The level ends with them meeting up at the end and beating up some Angelos while the room they're in slides down a mountain, Uncharted 2 style. Pretty good level all the way through. There are some levels that are just a single boss fight, which is typically saved for the final boss in previous DMC games, but there's a bit more here. Mission 6 is just a boss fight, which I would be fine with if the boss fight was actually good. This is one of the worst bosses in the series, so maybe I should be glad that's an easy to skip level. I'm very much fine with Vergil's fight having its own level though, even if it's done twice right back to back. Though I'm not really sure if Urizen needed an entire level for his final boss fight right before that, considering you fought him 3 times already. Mission 14 is kind of a boss fight in the sense that it's a short boss rush, but it's honestly one of my favorite levels in the whole game. V's stuck in an alternate dimension without any of his familiars, each one trapped behind one of 3 boss fights. Interestingly, none of these bosses are originally fought by V, so this is basically all new territory. You can fight them in any order you want, and can gain back 1 familiar for each fight. It's not completely linear, gives some room for player choice, and is a nice challenge fighting these bosses with a limited moveset. Overall, while a lot of levels aren't necessarily bad, I can't give it any praise either because it's very basic. The level design obviously isn't the highlight of this combat game, but some more varied layouts and level gimmicks would have been appreciated. The only real gimmick or puzzle-related thing you'll find in any of these levels are the Needhog hatchlings. Pick one up and put it on a specified wall to progress. Although I say this is puzzle-related, they're only used for actual puzzles in one level, Mission 4, one of the first levels in the whole game and the first mission where you play as V. The game gives you a hatchling to be used later on, but to get to the secret mission of the level, you'll need 2. The second hatchling is hidden in a secret path behind a wall that the game encourages you to break. Using both hatchlings puts you in prime position to access the secret mission, and then the hatchlings are never used to this extent again. This is one of the more varied levels in the game, so it's a shame this mechanic didn't really go anywhere. On the topic of secret missions, they're not great. The missions themselves are fine, but I'm referring to how they're hidden. When you're first introduced to them, the game makes it seem like you'll have to find the exact perfect spot to stand on to unlock them. You need to line up the symbol on the wall perfectly so it lights up. This is a bit misleading, because not all of them are like this. In fact, a good handful of the secret missions are essentially just find a secret path and stand on the right spot. The one in Mission 10 isn't even hidden at all, it's behind a door with a timer on it, so the challenge isn't to find the secret mission itself, it's to clear the room before the door closes. The secret mission is handed to you on a silver platter afterwards. It's just right there. Most of the time, I would find the spot to access the secret mission before even realizing there was a secret mission nearby. Some of them are well hidden, like in Mission 12. The symbol is so huge, it's easy to miss despite being right along your path. But if you do notice it, you'll then be encouraged to explore a part of the level you wouldn't even have thought of before. This is the exact opposite of the one Mission 10. Instead of finding a secret path leading to the symbol itself leads you to explore an area of the level you probably didn't know existed before to unlock it. Again, level design has never been the highlight of the series, so although this is a genuine downside that harms the game, I didn't mind it much at the moment because the highlight is the fast-paced combat and explosive boss fights. Speaking of, bosses are a DMC specialty, and thankfully, most of them here are fantastic. That's not to say they're all good, there's a handful of stinkers. Needhog is the obligatory stuck against the wall boss, but a really bad one at that. Beat his extra tentacle thing so he lowers himself and then you can hit him to do damage. It's not interesting and doesn't encourage you to use your moveset in a meaningful way, it's just boring. The first 3 Urizen fights are also like this, but a bit more interesting. He puts a lot of junk on screen compared to Needhog, requiring a lot more player activity. And also, you don't fight him as V, so you can be a lot more active during gameplay. Gilgamesh is not only terrible, but takes up an entire level for his boss fight, which is typically reserved for boss fights that are either integral to the story, like Vergil, or boss fights that just have the decency to be good, like Vergil. You barely even fight him, you just climb in then hit the weak point while it's exposed. The only way you're taking damage against this boss is if you do a laggy attack when he's about to form spikes on his back. The Malphus fight is kind of slow and can be annoying the first time around if you don't know how to counter the bird's rage mode. Once you do know how to counter it though, it's a breeze. My least favorite fight in the game is the Familiar Trio. It's not the worst boss fight by itself, Gilgamesh is far worse, but trying to S-rank this fight is one of the worst experiences of my life. For these more annoying fights, it is heavily encouraged that you use Dr. Faust. When I fought this boss on Dante Must Die, I still hadn't gotten everyone's taunts from the shop, so I tried everything in my power to not dump all my red orbs into his attacks. It took me hours and I got close sometimes, but this fight is really hard to do damageless unless you're a master with Royal Guard. I eventually gave in and used Red Hot Knight once, and immediately won the fight. Then, of course, Vergil waits at the end, and his fight is just as awesome as past games, maybe even more so. He uses a lot of new tools, like Doppelganger Swords, Sin Devil Trigger, and so on. It's a bit unfortunate that the fight with Nero is noticeably easier than the fight with Dante, but it has an added bonus of having the best moment in the whole game. On your first playthrough, Nero doesn't have his Devil Trigger up until this point. He has an outburst and does everything in his power to stop Dante and Vergil from fighting, which finally activates it. Doing this in the fight will result in the most raw line read I've ever heard in a game. The music here is dynamic like the normal fights, and will change once you activate Devil Trigger. The opening being a more somber piece before it explodes into a great remix of Devil Trigger. This moment, and this boss fight in general, is peak. I don't think anything will ever top Nero's defining moment here. Surprisingly, the best boss in the game is actually Dante. One of the only things that changes in the Vergil campaign is that the final 2 missions are boss fights with Dante instead of Vergil. This isn't just the best boss fight for the fight itself, but everything around it too. The first phase starts how you would expect, just throwing you right into it. Once you beat Dante, the level abruptly ends and starts playing the cutscene from the main game when the same mission ends. But this time, Nero isn't there to interrupt their duel, and the music drops. The first time I experienced this mission, I had goosebumps, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. Dante starts pulling out the big guns during this fight, literally. Kalina and 2, long Cerberus combos, and Sin Devil Trigger, which includes his screen nuke move that you better hope you have the concentration built up to deal with, otherwise you're dead. Dante pushes you to your limits, and while it may not be the hardest boss fight, encourages you to experiment with everything you have in order to avoid Dante's stronger moves and make an offense of your own. And for that, this might just be the best boss fight in the series. So while the level design is bad, most people probably overlook it because of the combat and generally good boss fights, which I can't blame them a whole lot for. When I'm fighting enemies and bosses, I'm not thinking about how the entire level is just a straight line from start to end. But at the same time, I'll play through levels, and every time I'm not fighting an enemy, that feeling easily finds its way back to me. I think a major part of what holds the level design back is the story. Not the super specific details, but rather the pacing of it. You spend the first part of the game just trying to get to the Qlipoth, where you finally arrive at mission 8. So that's 8 missions where you spend just getting to the Qlipoth. V leaves before that to find the Devil Sword Sparta, which is a whole level on its own, but he ends up fighting Dante. The game then has a whole mission dedicated to a flashback showing us stuff we already know. Dante tries to fight Urizen, gets bodied, Nero shows up, we know the rest. This is one of the biggest offenders of the pacing. This really didn't need to be a level. Anyway, now Dante spends 2 missions making his way to the Qlipoth. Once he gets there, V joins him, and now everyone is here. Now that we made it to a very high point on the Qlipoth, we have to go all the way to the bottom. There's 4 entire levels dedicated to this. Dante then fights Urizen again, and then has to go all the way back to the top. Then you fight Vergil twice, and the game ends. With the removal of actual puzzles, every level feels more and more like fodder because the end goal is always moving. Now, this wouldn't be an issue if the writing gave each character adequate time to shine, which it does for the most part. Before I talk about those characters, allow me to quickly summarize the plot just so we're all on the same page. After the events of DMC4, Nero now works with Dante as a part of Devil May Cry in Fortuna. Vergil is somehow alive after the events of the first game where Dante seemingly killed him. He shows up at Nero's doorstep and steals Nero's arm because it absorbed the Yamato. Because Vergil is literally crumbling into dust, he then uses the Yamato to split himself into 2 parts, his human half, which is V, and his demon half, which is Urizen. By doing this, he casts all his injuries onto V, while Urizen lived in full strength. V eventually makes his way to Dante, who tells him about how Urizen will soon raise a demonic tree called the Qlipoth out of the ground. Dante attempts to fight Urizen once he finally appears, but fails. Nero also fails, thus leading to a short time skip after a tactical retreat, and then begins the long haul back to the Qlipoth. Nero goes on to fight Urizen, while V hangs back to find the Devil Sword Sparta. He ends up finding it in Dante's possession, getting Dante back in the game. They both make their way back to Nero. On his way, Dante finds his old house, where he combines the rebellion with the Devil Sword Sparta to make the Devil Sword Dante, and also unlock his Sin Devil Trigger. He saves Nero's ass and forces Urizen to retreat. They all make their way to the bottom of the Qlipoth, where Urizen is now harvesting a fruit from all the blood he's collected, which will give him ultimate power. Dante finds him first, fights him, and beats him. Nero and V quickly catch up, where V then fuses with Urizen once again so Vergil is fully restored. Vergil retreats to the top of the Qliphothe, where Dante then drops the bombshell on Nero that Vergil is his father. He knows this because of the way Yamato reacted to Nero and literally nothing else. Dante proceeds to the top of the Qliphothe, where he has to kill all of V's familiars, which were all symbolic of the first game's bosses and represent Vergil's trauma after being tortured by Mundus for years. After making it to the top, Dante is done with Vergil's shit and the two of them clash. Nero has an epiphany while this is happening, and finally unlocks his own unique devil trigger, which allows him to put a stop to their fight. After Nero kicks his old man's ass, the Qliphothe becomes a notable issue for the Devil Hunters, so Dante and Vergil decide to go to the Underworld and cut it down from there. This means they'll be trapped on the other side, something Nero is strongly against, but Dante assures Nero that it's because Nero is staying on the upside that they can do this. The game ends with the two brothers sparring in the pits of hell with their relationship rekindled as their friendly rivalry continues. I normally wouldn't have just summarized all that, but I believe it makes it easier to talk about in detail for those who may have forgotten some parts of the plot. Now let's actually talk about the characters in detail. Nero is great. I think this game truly solidifies his position as the new future protagonist of the series. He's a very upbeat character, relying very much on his emotions to give him strength. One of my favorite scenes in the game is at the very start, when Vergil approaches him before ripping off his arm. Nero just assumes he's a homeless guy looking for something to eat, and he not only offers him food, but invites him to eat with him and Kyrie in the house. Nero's such a nice dude, I love him. He does unfortunately get pushed aside a bit once Dante wakes up, but his follow-through at the end is great. The nuclear revelation that Vergil, the man who stole his arm, is his father strikes him at his core. After growing up being made fun of for not having parents, all he had was Kyrie and her brother Credo. Not knowing that his actual father and uncle are about to fight to the death to prove their power, Nero is motivated to display his own power. This rings back to what he said in DMC4 when his devil trigger was first awakened. He recognizes that you need power to be strong, but he wants to use his power for the sole purpose of protecting those he loves. This is what finally pushes him to save Dante and Vergil from killing each other. What makes this even more interesting is that it's a direct parallel with Vergil. Vergil felt abandoned at a young age after thinking everyone he loved had died, which caused him to seek strength for the sake of proving himself. Nero is basically Vergil if Vergil's mother hadn't been killed. Nero has people to protect, so he does everything in his power to protect them, proving to Vergil by beating him in combat that strength for the sake of protecting others makes you stronger than strength for the sake of beating others. He hates feeling useless, hence why he's so stuck up about Dante calling him deadweight, and why he's so adamant on Vergil accepting his existence. Even their theme songs are great parallels. Not only does the actual melody of the song sound the exact same at points, but the lyrics indicate two different things. Nero's emotions make him strong, and Vergil's disregard for emotions make him strong. Neither one is technically wrong, because they both have an immense amount of strength, but at the end of the day, Nero proves himself to his father by beating his ass. Nero is a great character, and although the focus on him was lost a bit in the middle, his progression from start to end is incredibly well done. Dante is in a weirder spot, because he already had his big development in DMC3. He's a lot more static in this game in terms of what he believes, his view on power, etc., but he still has a lot of great moments due to his relationship with Vergil. I know he did always love his brother deep down, and although they loved fighting each other, he never wanted him to die, which makes it all the more insane when Dante is so pissed off at Vergil that he's straight up ready to kill him. At first it kind of irked me that Dante was seemingly ready to kill Vergil due to the little bit of a genocide he committed, to then be completely fine with him once Nero slapped the shit out of him. I think it was just a bit of uncontrollable rage. He was only focusing on the bad that Vergil was capable of, not recognizing that he still loves his brother and his new experiences, as V could have changed him in some way. He does do a similar thing in DMC3, where he tells Vergil he's willing to kill him if it's the only way to stop him, but still tries to save him from sealing his fate in the Underworld. In the end, I like how he sees that Vergil has at least started to change and is willing to get rid of the Qliphothe to save everyone. Aside from that, he's still the haha funny wahoo pizza man we all know and love. I would say he was probably his most consistently laid back and funny in DMC4, but DMC5 is a good mix of serious Dante and funny Dante. The Michael Jackson dance scene is the greatest scene in video game history. Vergil. Vergil is the most interesting character in this game, but also the most problematic. For the sake of compressing everything down a bit, I'll be talking about V during this part as well. But before I actually talk about Vergil, can I just complain for a second about how stupid this game is for beating around the bush with his reveal? There are plenty of decently subtle references that he was Urizen from the beginning of the game, but they just get way too obvious with it. When V first meets Dante at the start of Mission 9, he straight up says his name, it just gets cut off. Anyone who knows of Vergil's existence is gonna know who he's talking about at that point. At the start of Mission 12, V just tells Trish literally everything about how Vergil split himself in two. They're still hesitant on name-dropping Vergil for whatever reason, and don't reveal his name until Mission 17, which is the same mission when V reunites with Urizen to form Vergil. So then people who are longtime fans are like, whoa, it's Vergil, but I already knew that because they told me 10 missions ago. And then new fans are probably still wondering about the implications of Vergil being back. I would group this with my issues about the pacing, because Vergil being formed in Mission 17 means he only appears in the game for 4 missions, and that's counting as 2 seconds at the end of Mission 17 when he's reformed. He's barely present during Mission 18 because it's just Dante scaling the Qliphotha and fighting the familiars. This means Vergil's only significant screen time is at the start of Mission 18 and during Missions 19 and 20, which are levels solely dedicated to his boss fight. For being such an integral character, he definitely should have been present for more than just the final 4 levels. Now, as much as I'm complaining about this blow is softened by the inclusion of V as a main protagonist. Although I want to say Vergil is a more interesting character overall, because V is a major part of his character, instead I'll just say that V is the best character in this game in regards to the story. Because he's Vergil's human side, he feels strong emotion and has a decent moral compass. The main reason he seeks Dante and Nero's help to stop Urizen is because he genuinely feels bad for what he did as Vergil. He recognizes the importance of both the human and demon sides of Vergil, and is terrified at Urizen slaughtering countless humans for the sake of power. So once he finally does reunite with Urizen, it gives Vergil a lot to think about. Due to his experiences as both V and Urizen, it causes him to rethink his entire view on strength. Urizen was definitely strong due to being pure demonic power. But even after eating the fruit of the Qliphotha, a fruit that was so powerful it allowed Mundus to become king of the underworld, he still gets beaten by Dante. So maybe Vergil's initial view about his humanity being weak was wrong from the start. I think the scene of him talking to himself on top of the Qliphotha says a lot about how V's journey has affected him. He was so strong and adamant about his views before, but now, while he still is quite strong, it's possible for him to realize that Dante was right all along. At the very least, he seems content with sparring with his brother in hell for the time being to test that theory. He hasn't exactly 100% changed everything he believes, but it's the possibility that he can change more than he already has that makes it interesting. My main issue with this is how reliant Vergil's growth in this game is on his overall backstory. A backstory that we still don't completely know. There is a short manga series, Visions of V, which covers V's entire life and sheds some backstory on Vergil. For the sake of this video, I read the whole thing, and it was pretty good. But while I appreciate the lore, shouldn't this have just been portrayed in the game? Having a manga is cool, but why do I have to access outside material in order to understand core material related to Vergil's development? Anyway, what we know from this is that during Vergil's childhood, a demonic raid was conducted on his house. We see a glimpse of that in-game, where their mother hides Dante in a closet and leaves to look for Vergil. Vergil wasn't home at the time of the raid, but demons still found their way to him. While he tried to fight them off, they ultimately killed him, forcing him to unlock his devil trigger prematurely. He went back to his house to find it completely burning down with no sign of life anywhere. His mother had been killed, and he had no idea what happened to his brother. This is the core of what drives him to be stronger, and something I didn't expect from his character. You would think that this traumatic experience would cause his desire for power out of a regret for not being able to save his mother. But it's actually the other way around. While he does feel pain for not being strong enough to protect those he loves, as a child, it was him who wanted to be protected. While under attack, he screamed for his mother and brother to save him, but it was in vain. Yamato came to his aid, and once Vergil found what used to be his home set ablaze, it instilled the core belief that he can only rely on himself. This recontextualizes a lot of scenes from DMC3, where Vergil berates Dante for refusing to gain power, claiming that without it, he can't protect anyone, not even himself.
Might controls everything, and without strength, you cannot protect anything, let alone yourself.
Because of his belief that he can only rely on himself for strength, it causes him to view his human side as weak. His emotions only hold him back. Love got him nowhere because he felt abandoned, and being afraid causes hesitation and can get you killed. This is the main conflict of DMC3, where Dante only values his human side, while Vergil only values his demon side. It's through the acceptance of both sides that Dante is eventually victorious in the end. We don't see Vergil again until DMC1, where he's under Mundus' control, but he's not really a character in that game. Finally getting back to DMC5, we can sink our teeth into V. As Vergil's human side, he views himself as weak. He's essentially powerless, with hardly any strength of his own, relying on his familiars to do most of the dirty work. Although, it's through his experiences as just his human side that he finally comes to realize why Dante was so much stronger than him. Along his journey, he encounters a little boy trying to save his mother. V berates him for not being strong enough to defeat the demons himself, but the boy refuses to leave. Despite his antagonizing, V helps him anyway after the boy begs him for help, because deep down, he knows this boy was exactly like him. He wanted the strength to protect his mother, but needed to be protected himself. Once V starts crumbling due to a lack of power, his fear starts to kick in. While he had been doing his best to block out his emotions, he can't deny how genuinely afraid he is of death. This fear sets in the realization that he wasn't the one that wanted to save his mother all those years ago, but the exact opposite. He wanted his mother to save him. V realizes how truly important he is as the human side of Vergil, and how Dante beat him all those years ago through his acceptance of both halves inside him. He sees his own dilemma in Nero as well, someone who was once weak but then was saved by someone. This someone gave Nero a reason to fight and made him strong. Vergil didn't have that same luxury, but he could have had it in his brother, Dante. As V confronts his younger self, he discovers how truly important Dante is to him, and how much his brother obviously cares for him. And if he had the chance to do so, Dante would have saved him. But you can't save someone unless they want to be saved. And at that point in Vergil's life, he was beyond saving and already determined to gain power on his own. So then, when the two brothers spar in the depths of the underworld, we can see Vergil crack a smile. Not one out of cockiness or due to the thrill of the fight, but out of sheer happiness. He's finally coming to terms with his humanity and accepting that he needs his brother in his life, and I think that's kinda beautiful. The idea for all these characters in the story is all well thought out and written to perfection. But like I said before, my only problem is that it isn't all in the game itself. Even aside from Visions of V, there are other books that dive into these characters, and I can only assume they're good because I don't have the time to read all of them right now. You can't just play the games if you want to fully sink your teeth into these characters, especially Vergil. So much of Vergil's character is left up to interpretation without Visions of V. Say what you want about Metal Gear Solid 4 with its long cutscenes and questionable writing choices, but when I play that game, I know everything I need to know about every character just from playing the game. Devil May Cry 5 has a great story to tell, but a good chunk of it is in the background, left up to interpretation without insight on the outside sources, and that annoys me when they could have just told the story in the game. Even so, I can't deny I love every character present here despite my disdain for how they handled the storytelling itself. Even the characters that aren't important are pretty fun. It's just a shame that Trish and Lady are pushed aside for most of the game. But that doesn't matter, Uncle Ben. Nico is better than both of them. This script is already incredibly long, and I don't want to have to reword a bunch of it to include stuff I've thought of after the fact, so this last segment will just be a bunch of extra random thoughts I had while writing the script. Nero and Dante have EX colors that you can only get by purchasing with real money. Vergil's can be unlocked in-game, which makes sense since he's a DLC character and you can purchase all of his unlockables separately, but V's EX color can also be unlocked normally, so I don't see why Nero and Dante's colors are locked behind a paywall. They look like garbage anyway, so I don't really care all that much though. In the settings, you can replace the current cutscenes with behind-the-scenes live-action cutscenes made by the dev team. It's like them storyboarding the cutscenes with themselves, and it's hilarious to see. I love how Griffin is just a guy on a ladder flapping a blanket on his back. I don't know of any other game that has something like this included, but now that DMC5 has this, I want every single game ever made after this to follow suit. Bloody Palace is really fun. It's certainly disheartening if you lose, especially if you make it far because the whole thing can take around an hour and a half to beat, but I don't think a game has ever got my blood pumping as much as the final 10 stages did. I have never locked in as much during a game as I have with Bloody Palace. The rewards are fun, but kind of underwhelming. Each character gets a unique taunt that has unique effects, and they're all kind of niche to use, especially Vergil's, but they're cool. Apparently you can unlock all of Vergil's extra unlockables normally by playing through his campaign. I was able to get his EX color in Super Vergil, but I could not for the life of me figure out how to get his music tracks. I looked online and didn't get a single definitive answer, but I tried what everyone was saying worked for them. I killed more demons than Dante did during the credits, I killed the Fury before Dante did, I killed the Behemoths before Dante did. I tried everything I could, but nothing worked. I ended up having to buy the tracks, which was cheap so I don't care much about the monetary loss, but it's annoying that this is an unlockable within the game itself that has no discernible way of actually unlocking it.
On the topic of Vergil, does Capcom ever truly plan on giving him his own unique campaign? Lots of vital info from Visions of V could have been recycled into a Vergil campaign. There's still some weird gaps in his life that we haven't the slightest idea about, like that random woman he probably hooked up with who would go on to be Nero's mother. Why would he do that? How did Vergil even find Nero after supposedly being killed by Dante while he was under Mundus's control? I don't think I'm asking for much here, just a short campaign that gives us some more insight into his character, rather than playing the exact same game again, but with a new opening and ending cutscene and a single new boss fight. It's kind of sad that the reboot gave Vergil his own unique campaign when the main series hasn't. The cameo system is one of the most wasted concepts I've seen in a game. In a handful of levels, there will be moments where you can see part of another character's level in the distance, and there's a chance you'll see that character playing through the level. This can either be recorded data from the DMC crew, or another player in real time. Missions 7 and 13 have intersecting paths that every character follows, meaning if you're playing in real time, you can beat up enemies with a random player, or even get a friend to join if you time it right. The problem is, it's only 2 levels that have intersecting paths. Every other time a cameo is present, they'll be off in the background fighting their own horde of enemies and you'll never interact once. I think in Mission 3, the V player can break a bridge and slightly alter the path for the Nero player, but that's it. Missions 7 and 13 are the only ones that actually let you fight together, which is a damn shame because it works really well. I went through those 2 levels with a friend and we had a blast. I'm not sure why they decided to throw this feature in there when it barely has room to shine. I would have loved it if they added a co-op mode and let you play through the whole game with a friend. Thankfully there are mods for that, but come on Capcom, you added co-op on the Switch version of DMC 3 Bloody Palace, why not throw us a bone here too? There's a few galleries in the main menu that show concept art, biographies for characters, and some letters that add a bit to the plot. Capcom has always been good about adding behind-the-scenes content with collections, but they went all out for the standalone title, which is awesome. Not to mention the lo-fi remix of Devil Trigger that plays in these menus, it heals my soul. I must have spent an extra hour or 2 here once I completed the game just taking in all the content I could. I wish this kind of extra content was an industry standard. But even if it isn't, at least I know it's a Capcom standard. There aren't many games out there that I've played that have so easily sucked me in and kept me in long after beating it. But through the hours, the constant repeated playthroughs, the amount of Buster Arms bought so I could insta-kill everything, the endless void of red orbs spent trying to desperately claw my way to victory with Dr. Faust, and the amount of times I just had to pause and rethink my life going for these S ranks on every level on every difficulty, I couldn't help but remain astonished at what it felt like to experience Devil May Cry 5. To say it's the peak of the combat genre is an understatement. The reputation it's garnered over the years was the main reason I went through every game before just to get to it. Although not all those games were as good as this one, it was still fun to watch the series evolve into what is almost unanimously praised as the best it can be. With some of the flashiest moves I've ever seen, the combat is flawless, allowing for experimentation and player expression, not degrading the player for picking easier options, but rather using those easier options as a gateway into more complex options while most strategies are equally effective regardless. The sky's the limit, and the game wants you to get as high as you can, but doesn't make fun of you for staying on the ground. The individual moves themselves are insane, with the overall visuals and music complementing them amazingly. I will never get Devil Trigger or Bury the Light out of my head for as long as I live. The level design is pretty lackluster, and while level design has never been a DMC specialty, the lack of puzzles makes most levels feel like a straight line from start to end, leaving most of the heavy lifting to the combat, and thankfully, it carries. Although I have qualms about how the story was handled in terms of pacing throughout the levels and vital plot points being delegated to outside sources, the actual writing of the story is top-notch. I love every character here, Nero, Dante, and especially Vergil. At first it felt like a chore to read an entire manga series to understand Vergil, but I quickly got into it and enjoyed it regardless of my initial disdain for its existence. Finally getting the full scope of his character now makes him, along with V, one of my favorite characters in any game ever. And now, as I sit here recording lines in my Toyota Highlander underneath a blanket, using Apple earbuds to record my voice on my phone, I can wholeheartedly say that this is one of the most thrilling gaming experiences I've ever had the pleasure of completing. DMC5 may very well be the only game to live up to the insane amount of hype it got before release. If you have ever wanted to play this game but decided against it, or just seen a cutscene you think looks cool, I implore you to just play it. It is one of the best decisions you could make in your life. And if you have already played it, why not give it another quick playthrough?
Use some battle tactics that you haven't used before. Run an unconventional Devil Breaker loadout. Have Cavalier as your main weapon. The sky's the limit with this game, and you are actively hurting yourself by sticking to the same strategy every single time. And when all is said and done, maybe you'll fall in love with the game all over again just like I did. Thanks for watching.
Don't you dare say it, jackpot!